Namaskar and welcome to this special presentation. I'm Shubhendu Ghosh. World leaders are gathering in Glasgow, United Kingdom for the COP26 Climate Summit. Expectations are high. United Nations has time and again warned about how the world has not done enough to check the challenge of climate change and the manner in which the crisis is here and now. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is representing India at COP26 and he has said that he will be pushing forward and talking about the manner in which collective efforts have been made in India and by India in mitigating climate challenges. I have with me a special guest, someone who has worked very closely at the highest level in the area of climate action, Mr. Satya Tripathi. Warm welcome to you, sir. Former Assistant Secretary General at United Nations, also Secretary General, Global Alliance for Sustainable Planet. Now, recent UN reports have clearly warned and raised alarm loud and clear about the manner in which action has been done or not done since the Paris Accords. How does that put immense pressure on this edition of COP26?
Well, I think this is, as the number suggests, we've had 26 such conference of parties. And some have been successful and some not so successful. Of course, people often refer to the Paris COP in 2015 as a successful one, primarily because all countries of the world came together to agree on something. I mean, of course, there was no common standard or measure, but it was more voluntary that countries decided that what it is that they can do given the resources they have and what is being promised. And then within that, all countries came forward and put forward their nationally determined contributions. And that altogether made up what we know as the Paris Agreement.
Right. Now, the Paris Agreement was also about solidarity towards developing nations, whether we talk about technology transfer or providing the adequate finance and funding for climate change mitigation, about $100 billion per year fund. But it hasn't really happened. In fact, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said that there is not even a model or a structure in which this financing would happen. How does that make the situation worrisome?
Well, she's absolutely right. Because if you look at what has happened since 2015 till now, let alone $100 billion every year flowing to the developing world, cumulatively $100 billion hasn't happened. So that's a stark reminder that you might have great ideas and great motivation to do the right thing, but in the absence of resources, it's never going to happen. And that's why someone wise once said, for ideas to work, someone has to do the work. And for that someone to do the work, whether it's a country or an institution or people, you need the resources.
Right. And do you think this delay that has come into being, that has further increased the gap between rich and poor nations as far as mitigating climate change is concerned?
I think it will get much worse, because dealing with climate change or the adverse impacts of climate change is mostly about resilience, how much ability you have to deal with the adverse consequences and spring back or recover from either it's a hurricane or a cyclone or a flood or droughts, whatever it is that affects a particular country or a territory, your ability to come back and be a vibrant society again depends on what are your reserves, what are the resources you have that you can deploy. We've seen it in this pandemic. The inequality and hundreds of millions of people have been pushed back into poverty. Not because anyone wanted it to be so, but it's all a question of resilience.
Right. And every missed target that we're talking about at a time when there is such urgency for a cohesive climate action, it is pushing the goal of the temperature that we hope we'll be able to maintain even further away.
Well, it's the lack of international solidarity, which is not just reflected in our lack of a common understanding of the climate threats and the climate action we must undertake together as countries, but that is also manifest in the lack of solidarity in the vaccine situation, where there are numerous countries that actually have more vaccines stored that could actually deal with twice or thrice their own populations, whereas hundreds of countries around the world have yet to start vaccination on a serious note.
Right, and the conversations really are centering around climate action And we know that Prime Minister Narendra Modi is representing India at COP26. How do you assess India's performance as far as commitment to climate change cause is concerned? We have International Solar Alliance, which is gaining in strength and size. Then India also has one of the highest installed capacity as far as renewable energy is concerned. Then, of course, a 450 gigawatt vision for the end of the decade. What is your assessment of how much has India been able to do at this point in time?
Well, let's separate the rhetoric from the facts.
Sure.
So the rhetoric is that, well, India has actually met its Paris Agreement commitments consistently. But there's
and exceeded in some reports.
And exceeded in some parts.
Yes.
But there are those that believe that, well, India committed too little. So of course they are meeting their targets. Now, that's the rhetoric, right? The facts speak for themselves. The facts are that in terms of the historical emissions into the atmosphere, India has only emitted 3% of the total carbon concentration in the atmosphere, which is currently 420 parts per million. The last time we were here was 3 million years ago. That's how bad the situation is. But India has played a very small part in that, only 3% of the total concentration, the emissions into the atmosphere in terms of historical emissions. That's the stock. In terms of flows, India contributes about roughly 7% of the annual flows. Now contrast that with the fact that India's population is roughly about 17%, globally speaking. So a country that has 17% of the world's population has put in historically only 3% of the carbon stock in the atmosphere, and in terms of flows, only 7%. But there's another metric that's, I think, telling. The IPCC and all the other scientists tell us that the ideal carbon footprint for an individual should be 2.1 tons per capita. And India's current carbon footprint per capita is only 1.9 tons. And there are numerous countries in the world that are about 10, some at 16, some even at 20. So it is a very difficult argument to make with India, or for that matter any other country that is under the ideal footprint, that you need to do as much as any other country that is emitting far much more into the atmosphere than India ever has, whether historically or even in terms of current emissions.
And then what, according to you, would India seek to achieve in this edition of COP26?
Well, I think the point needs to be made very emphatically that the countries that have hardly contributed to the climate crisis that we are all in the midst of are going to pay a very heavy price for their ecosystems and their populations, and then that needs to change, and that cannot change without making available the technology and the resources in a spirit of partnership. And nobody is looking for charity. And I'm famously reminded of the Pope, who a few years ago said, the poor of the world do not need charity, they need dignity. So a dignified arrangement will be to make the kind of resources available, and there could be 1,000 different ways you can cut the cake, private finance, low cost, long-term finance, what is more popularly known as patient capital, because you can't bring back a forest in 3 years or 5 years and expect 20% returns. That's voodoo economics, that doesn't work. You really want to bring back a forest, then you have to invest for 15 or 20 years.
A commitment over a longer period of time.
Absolutely.
Sir, leaders who are presenting the case for their respective nations. We've seen Prime Minister Narendra Modi in no unclear terms talk about how climate consciousness has been part of Indian culture. Go back a few years, former US President Donald Trump had a completely different worldview towards climate change. President Biden now is bringing America back to the fold. So what role, what responsibility will the leaders be carrying going forward?
Well, I think President Biden is playing a stellar role in terms of bringing the United States back into the conversation. Secretary Kerry has been all over the world trying to impress upon people the need to act and the need to act now. But I think India's role here could be really catalytic. Let me explain how. In 2018, when I was the UN Assistant Secretary General, dealing with environmental matters based in New York, Prime Minister Modi took a very bold step. That year, India was actually hosting the Global World Environment Day celebrations. And he really stepped forward and said, we're going to make India free of single-use plastic by 2022, which is next year. And then, of course, since then, there has been a lot of discussions within the government and a lot of dialogues between industry and government as to what is the right mix of policy and enforcement. And a few weeks ago, actually, India announced the regulations for getting rid of single-use plastic, what is to be completely gotten rid of, and there are timelines set up. That's, I think, something that very few countries in the developing world have actually done at this scale of India and the complexity of the Indian plastics ecosystem. The second thing that India has done very well, and the Prime Minister actually mentioned this at the Conference of Parties of the UN Convention on Desertification, what is more popularly known as UNCCD, 2019, India hosted the COP. And the Prime Minister there mentioned about that he's committed to something called zero-based natural farming, ZBNF, or more popularly known as community-based natural farming, where you shun synthetic agrochemicals and pesticides, and you actually only use natural substances. And you talked about India's heritage. This goes back to the ancient agricultural practices of India, and in a way our heritage and culture, and bringing that back where you see, and Andhra Pradesh, by the way, has already converted 1 million farmers. Many other states, Karnataka, Maharashtra, Gujarat, Haryana, and different, Himachal Pradesh. So I think altogether about 3 million farmers have actually switched from chemical farming to zero chemical farming. And that has resulted in exponential benefits in terms of public health, in terms of ecosystem health, in terms of water conservation, in terms of saving on electricity subsidies, chemical fertilizer subsidies, because they don't use fertilizers at all. And mind you, India's fertilizer subsidy bill per annum is $13 billion. So this could be an all-round development. But what I lament is that when the Indian Prime Minister announces that we are doing this and we are really interested to do it all across the country, I didn't see any other world leader really stepping forward in 2019 and saying, Prime Minister Modi, you are doing an amazing thing. And this can really change the world, because the soil has the ability to hold 3 times as much carbon as is in the atmosphere. So you can deal with carbon by avoiding it, better technology, or not using it with as much intensity, or sequester it by trees or by soil organic carbon, which is a far cheaper way of doing it, because it also helps people. And so when prime ministers such as ours step forward and take these bold steps, the world needs to step forward as well and say, we hear you, and we're going to work with you to help you achieve the vision of a resurgent India based on natural farming, based on biomass energy. There are 100 ways you can actually do this, and that all comes back to resources.
Right, and when Prime Minister Modi speaks about equitable distribution of carbon space, how is he making a case for India and, with India, the developing nations of the world?
Well, it's about climate justice, because carbon is a finite commodity within a framework. So if you're talking about 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels, or 2 degrees of global warming above pre-industrial levels, so that then produces a carbon budget. So, and we all have to work within that budget. So if India has, say, 17% of the world's population, which might to 18, 19, 20% over the next decades, so should India not have access to 20% of that carbon budget, which is currently only 7%? So I think that's the case that is being made. But at the same time, we shouldn't act because it will help some other countries stay at 8 times or even 10 times our carbon footprint. But we need to act because we will be the worst victims of the climate damage that has happened, thanks to numerous other countries, not of our doing, but we'll pay a very heavy price. And we really need to protect ourselves, our people, and our ecosystems for the future, and that's why we need to act.
Right. Mr. Tripathi, also we understand that transition to cleaner sources of energy is critical for any sort of climate action. Now, it's not as if change is not happening. We are seeing more and more electric cars around us, here in India as well. There is also commitment to green hydrogen. But it is the pace at which that change has to happen across the world, because the use of fossil fuels is still on. Some reports suggest that by 2030, many countries, developed countries, would have increased manyfold their use of fossil fuels. How does one tackle that problem?
Well, I think it's a problem of will, because when you commit to something, you need to act in that direction. Just to give you a small example, we know for sure now that fossil fuels are the problem. Whether it's, coal, of course, gets an unfair treatment because it's visible, it's black, it's under the ground, it produces smoke. So, it's in colors or in terms of direct inhaling impact, it weighs you down, so it's very visible, but it's no worse than gasoline or diesel or the other forms of fossil fuel. And there, the point is that when you promise that you will really act, and then the countries of the world together go out and put $500 billion every year in fossil fuel subsidies. So you can't wish the problem away when you are feeding the monster. So that's the challenge. We really, and this is not about India, this is not about X country or Y country. We as a planet, we as humanity really need to understand the challenge for what it is, and that we only have roughly 9 to 10 years to act in a way that stops the non-stop onslaught of climate change and its terrible impacts, and that's extremely important for governments to note.
Right, and in the run-up to the COP26 Climate Summit, sir, there are also these conversations talking about pushing more and more countries to commit to that net zero emission, especially by the mid of this present century. What does that mean for India and developing countries in particular?
Well, I think, there's a famous saying that if you don't have a deadline, 99% of things never get done. So I think it's a good thing to put a deadline or a timeline to whatever it is you want to achieve, and that holds true for any country. But if you asked me, and honestly, net zero is not zero. That's how I feel, because as I said earlier, you can avoid carbon or you can sequester carbon. And the highly industrialized nations, they might be able to avoid some, but they'll still need to get offsets. They'll have to find that somewhere. And that is where a partnership with a country like India, which has 160 million hectares of cropland, that can sequester billions of tons of carbon by switching to sustainable agriculture, by natural farming practices, which is in our DNA, because that's what we have done before NPK or nitrates and phosphates happened roughly about 100 years ago. That's how we did agriculture. And so the possibilities are there, and there could be an amazing partnership between those that need the offsets and those that can actually produce the offsets in a way that actually brings back the ecosystems, revives nature, and builds prosperity at the grassroots. Right. So that's what I think could be, that's the direction to which the conversation must proceed.
But in doing that, do you see developing country like India will need to do a fine balance between its climate goals and the development goals?
They're not mutually exclusive. You can actually have your cake and eat it too. The climate goals actually are coterminous with sustainable development goals. You cannot achieve one without achieving the other. So that's what it is for India. Now, people often talk about net zero. The challenge is this: if you take the case of the United States, their emissions peaked in 1972. So when the United States promises that we will get to net zero by 2050, and I take it that they really mean it, because if you see what President Biden is doing, they really mean it. But the point is this: they would have had 78 years from their peaking to get to net zero. India hasn't even peaked as yet. Right. So that's the immense challenge for India. So it's not anchored in reality to expect India to commit to net zero. India should rather follow the path of we don't want to be net zero. We want to be net positive, which is to say we'll be nature positive. We'll protect our nature.
Which means we are absorbing more carbon than we're
Absolutely.
producing.
That's exactly what it has to be. So, there are so many ways you can get to the same mathematical equation, which is what carbon emissions is.
And so between the Paris summit and the Glasgow summit, we've also had this unprecedented COVID pandemic, which is still on in many ways. Has that made matters worse in sort of keeping aside, dedicating resources to climate action?
Yes and no. There is of course the challenge because the resources are finite, so every country was trying to protect itself.
Yes.
But then there are some countries that actually have way much more resources to deploy even while they are protecting themselves. India is certainly not one of those countries. So India has been stretched to the limit in terms of the resources it had to deploy to protect its population and vaccinate a population of roughly 140 crore people. That's 1.4 billion people, and so that's not easy. And so the countries that have the resources and the strategic depth in terms of reserves should open up their wallets to the rest of the world in an empowering partnership. And as I earlier said, nobody is looking for charity, but to do your fair share in terms of taking responsibility for the carbon that you have put out in the atmosphere that has resulted in the situation we all find ourselves in.
Right. And how do you also see the role of the private sector? For now, in climate action, we see a significant reliance on public finance. Do you think the private sector could step up? The corporations could become better?
Private sector not only has to step up, but has to play the predominant role. If you look at the global economy, of course, it varies from one country to another depending on how advanced your economy is. Right. But in broad brush strokes, the global GDP is about 30% in the public sector and 70% in the private sector. So you take 30% of the pie on which citizens and constituents have numerous demands from their governments, and you somehow believe that whatever little money you can find there for climate action is going to solve 100% of your problems. It doesn't add up. So the private sector has to play a significant role, and it's a very welcome thing that many corporations actually are going out of the way to announce that I want to be net zero by 2030, because they have the resources and the technology to do it. So why not do it across the planet wherever you are present, wherever your footprint is? So I think that's a very welcome change. The idea of blended finance or innovative finance, where a country with a much better credit rating steps forward and says, well, I don't want to part with my money, I'll keep my money, but I'll provide a counter guarantee to a loan that a country with a lesser credit rating is looking for. So when you blend a triple B with a triple A, suddenly that investment in nature becomes investment grade, and the costs fall, then that you can have long-term capital, because if the costs are lower, you can borrow whichever way you structure your financial instruments. Right. It works for all, actually.
Right. And so finally, United States climate envoy John Kerry speaks about how the world does not seem to be aligned with the science of climate change per se, and therefore we do not see the kind of momentum that is needed as far as climate action is concerned. And I also want to bring in the kind of action that we've seen globally, in India and globally, on tackling the pandemic. The momentum has been significant. It has been a more or less a do or die situation. Why haven't we seen that as far as in the sector of climate change? And what do you think would it take to bring about that kind of awareness and commitment to action?
I think the awareness is now there. I think one of the greatest failures of the climate movement has been its inability to communicate the challenge in its entire scope. There's been a sense
that the climate change is happening at the poles, till forests were burning next to our houses.
Because, just take the name itself, climate change, and we keep telling change is good. Everything is dynamic, whereas change is static. Change is the only constant in everybody's life. So we somehow take change as a good thing, change for the better. So we should have never called this climate change to start with. We should have called it climate catastrophe or a climate breakdown.
Which they're calling it now.
They're calling it now, but 30 years down the line. Because the first time we had these conversations was in 1992 in Rio. So, and of course we have been talking about it before that, from the World Conference on Sustainable Development in 1972, the Stockholm Conference, but with much greater intensity in 1972 that gave birth to these 3 Rio Conventions.
Right.
But the challenge is this, that we called it climate change. And change is good. So people thought, oh, it's gradual, it's incremental. And now we've gotten to a place where it's not incremental, it is exponential, it's rising in geometric progression, and contrast that with our willingness to act, it completely falls short. Let me point out that the UNEP production gap report that just came out 48 hours ago points out that the countries of the world together need to reduce their emissions by 55% by 2030 from current levels, and the revised NDCs, the synthesis report that UNFCCC produced and announced a few weeks ago, tells us that we'll actually be doing only 8%. It doesn't add up. We really have to do much more, but not within the framework of an unrealistic expectation from the developing world, but within the framework of building empowered partnerships with respect, with dignity, that will then help the kind of resources that need to flow into the developing world to make the changes that are needed to really save ourselves. And I want to also highlight this point. People often say that the planet needs saving. No, planet doesn't need saving. The planet has been here for billions of years. The species, us, the humans, need saving. And if we don't get that, there's something fundamentally wrong with us.
Right. On that note, Mr. Satya Tripathi, thank you very much for joining us for this conversation, sharing your perspective and giving us insights about climate action in the context of COP26. And with that, we conclude this special presentation. News and updates continue on DD India after a short break.